Welcome to our deep dive into Joe Dispenza's Evolve Your Brain.
Right.
We're going to be kind of like extracting key insights about neuroplasticity and stress and the mind's power to shape our lives.
Okay.
You know, reading Dispenza's take on stress really made me rethink how I approach daily challenges. What were your biggest takeaways from that section?
I think one of the things that was really fascinating to me was how Dispenza really kind of argues that chronic stress isn't just a feeling. It literally changes how our brains operate. We become more reactive, less capable of rational thought. Almost like our bodies start doing the thinking for us.
It's like we get stuck in a rut, reacting the same way to similar triggers, even when we know it's not helpful.
Exactly. He explains how this body thinking is linked to the sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight response. While it's designed to protect us under chronic stress, it can actually hijack our thought processes.
I was really struck by the way he describes how a single thought can trigger a cascade of hormonal changes, starting in the hypothalamus and leading to the release of adrenaline and cortisol from the adrenal glands. It's like our bodies are on constant high alert, even when there's no real danger present.
Right, and that's where Dispenza's emphasis on neuroplasticity comes in.
Okay.
He suggests that just as chronic stress can create negative neural pathways, we can consciously create positive ones. It all comes down to our ability to rewire our brains.
So how does he suggest we actually go about rewiring our brains?
Well, he uses the analogy of athletes training their minds and bodies for peak performance.
Right.
He suggests that through focused mental rehearsal, we can actually create new neural connections, making it easier to access desired states of mind.
This idea of mental rehearsal really resonated with me. I'm thinking about John, the writer Dispenza mentions, who struggled to focus amidst family chaos. By creating a specific environment and routine for his writing, he was able to train his brain to enter that flow state more easily.
Exactly. John's story highlights the power of repetition in strengthening neural pathways. It's like paving a new road in our brains. The more we travel it, the smoother and more accessible it becomes.
Okay, so we've got this ability to rewire our brains, which is amazing. But what about those times when it feels like our bodies are working against us? Dispenza mentions cases of spontaneous remission where individuals seemingly healed themselves from serious illnesses. Made me wonder, what role does belief play in our ability to overcome physical challenges?
That's a great question. Dispenza suggests that these individuals may have tapped into a greater mind, a kind of innate intelligence that governs our bodies. He draws parallels to hypnotic states and the power of belief to show how the subconscious mind can affect change in ways we don't fully understand.
It's a pretty radical idea, isn't it?
It is.
That our thoughts could have that kind of power.
And it certainly challenges the traditional medical model. But he argues that the mind plays a much more active role in healing than we previously thought.
He even talks about his own experience of healing from a serious spinal injury without surgery, relying on visualization and mental rehearsal.
And that personal story makes these concepts more tangible. He envisioned his spine fully repaired, focusing on that image with intense concentration and emotion. He also talks about the power of accessing the subconscious mind through techniques like hypnosis.
Okay, so if our thoughts and beliefs can potentially influence our physical health, what about our emotions? Dispenza delves into how emotions are created and how they can keep us stuck in repetitive patterns.
He explains that emotions are essentially chemical cocktails produced by the body in response to our thoughts and perceptions. If we're constantly thinking negative thoughts, our bodies will produce a corresponding chemical mix that reinforces those feelings.
So it's like a vicious cycle.
Exactly.
Negative thoughts create negative emotions, which in turn fuel more negative thoughts.
And Dispenza highlights how past hurts and resentments can trigger those same emotional responses, even when the current situation isn't directly related. He uses the example of a couple arguing how those old neural pathways associated with past hurts can fire off, leading to the same emotional reactions.
So even if we're consciously trying to change our bodies, might be working against us.
Which is why self-awareness is so crucial. We need to pay attention to our emotional triggers.
Yeah.
Notice the thoughts and situations that tend to evoke those familiar negative responses.
Right.
And then instead of reacting automatically, use our frontal lobes, that conscious part of our brains, to choose a different path.
Dispenza refers to the frontal lobe as the CEO of the brain.
Yes.
Responsible for executive functions like planning, self-control, and critical thinking.
And to illustrate its importance, he brings up the fascinating case of Phineas Gage, the railroad worker who suffered a severe frontal lobe injury.
His personality changed drastically after the accident.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder of how critical the frontal lobe is for regulating our behavior and shaping who we are.
Absolutely. And Dispenza suggests that by engaging our frontal lobes, we can break free from those habitual, often emotionally driven patterns and make conscious choices that align with our desired outcomes.
This brings us back to the idea of moving from thinking to being.
Right.
It's not enough to simply understand these concepts. We need to put them into practice.
He outlines 3 steps for lasting change.
Okay.
Knowledge, instruction, and feedback. We acquire knowledge, put it into practice with proper instruction.
Right.
And then refine our approach through feedback.
It reminds me of Melissa, the musician Dispenza mentions, who significantly improved her skills through expert feedback.
Right.
She had the knowledge and the drive, but it was the feedback from her teacher that helped her identify and correct those subtle mistakes, leading to a breakthrough in her playing.
Melissa's story highlights how valuable external perspectives can be.
Yeah.
Feedback helps us see ourselves more objectively and identify blind spots we might not be aware of.
Okay, before we move on to the next section, I want to touch on this concept of priming.
Yes, priming is fascinating. It's the idea that exposure to one stimulus can increase our awareness of related stimuli.
Like when you buy a new car and suddenly you see that same car everywhere.
Exactly.
But Dispenza takes it a step further, suggesting that our past experiences and beliefs can prime us to perceive the world in certain ways. So if we've been through a lot of heartbreak, for example, we might be primed to see danger or rejection in future relationships.
Right.
Even if it's not actually there.
That's a great example.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of becoming aware of our own priming patterns and how they might be shaping our reality.
Because if we're not careful, those unconscious biases can keep us stuck in the same cycles.
Absolutely.
Even when we're trying to change.
Recognizing those patterns is an essential step in breaking free from limitations and creating a more empowering reality.
It's like we're walking around with these invisible filters shaping how we experience the world.
Right.
But the good news is that we have the power to change those filters.
Yeah.
We can choose to see the world through a different lens, one that's more aligned with our goals and values, and that empowers us to create a more fulfilling and meaningful life.
It's about recognizing that we have the power to choose our perspective and create a reality that reflects our highest potential.
And that's a pretty empowering thought to leave our listeners with.
It is. It's about recognizing that we are not victims of our circumstances, but rather creators of our own reality.
And that's the beauty of neuroplasticity. It gives us the power to change our minds and ultimately change our lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like we're the architects of our own perception, but we often forget we hold the blueprints.
And those blueprints are constantly being updated based on our experiences and the choices we make.
Right.
It all comes back to that idea of neuroplasticity. Our brains are always evolving.
Dispenza suggests that it's not enough to just understand these concepts intellectually.
Right.
We need to embody them, make them a part of our lived experience.
So it's about moving beyond mental rehearsal and actually behaving in ways that align with our desired outcomes.
Right.
Like it's the difference between thinking about going to the gym and actually hitting the treadmill.
Right.
What are some concrete steps we can take to bridge that gap between thinking and being?
He emphasizes the importance of becoming aware of our automatic programs. Those unconscious patterns of thought and behavior we've developed over time.
Okay.
They run in the background, influencing our choices without us even realizing it.
It's like having a computer program running in the back of our minds, dictating our actions based on outdated code.
Exactly.
Like, how do we rewrite that code?
The first step is to bring those programs into conscious awareness.
Okay.
Through self-observation.
Okay.
We need to pay attention to our thoughts, feelings, and reactions.
Yeah.
Noticing the patterns that emerge.
It's like becoming a detective of our own minds.
Exactly.
Observing our internal world with a curious and objective lens.
Once we've identified those programs, we can start to challenge them.
Okay.
We need to use our frontal lobes, the CEO of the brain, to make a conscious choice to do things differently.
So instead of letting those old programs dictate our actions, we hit the pause button and make a deliberate choice about how we want to respond.
Precisely. And that act of conscious choice, repeated over time, rewires those neural pathways.
It's like we're creating a detour, rerouting our brain's traffic flow away from those well-worn but unhelpful paths.
Exactly.
But I imagine it's not always easy to break free from those deeply ingrained patterns.
Dispenza compares it to climbing a mountain.
Okay.
We leave the familiar comfort of home and venture into unknown territory. We're bound to encounter obstacles and setbacks along the way.
He really emphasizes that it's in those challenging moments that our commitment to change is truly tested.
It's easy to revert back to our old patterns when things get tough. But by pushing through those challenges, we build resilience and develop the mental strength to create lasting transformation.
So it's not a quick fix. It's an ongoing journey of self-discovery and growth.
Right.
And speaking of growth, I want to circle back to Dispenza's personal healing journey.
Sure.
It's such a powerful example of this mind-body connection in action, healing his spine without surgery. What really stood out to you about his approach?
His story underscores the potential for self-healing that exists within each of us. He used visualization and mental rehearsal, vividly imagining his spine fully repaired, and combined that with focused intention and a deep belief in his body's ability to heal.
He also emphasized the importance of accessing the subconscious mind through techniques like hypnosis. It challenges the traditional medical model, suggesting that the mind plays a much more active role in healing than we previously thought.
Absolutely. It raises fascinating questions about the limits of what's possible when we align our thoughts, beliefs, and actions towards a desired outcome.
So it's not just about positive thinking. It's about harnessing the power of our minds to influence our physical reality.
Exactly. Dispenza provides a framework for understanding how this process might work, drawing on both scientific research and personal experiences. It's about recognizing that we have a far greater capacity to influence our health and well-being than we often realize.
And to fully tap into that capacity, we need to understand not just the power of the mind, but also the ways in which our past experiences, particularly those loaded with emotion, can shape our present reality. Dispenza talks about how those past experiences can create a sort of priming effect.
He suggests that those past experiences and the emotions associated with them can create a filter through which we perceive the world. Let's say you've been through a painful breakup. You might be primed to see signs of rejection or betrayal in future relationships, even if they aren't really there.
It's like those past hurts create a lens that distorts our perception, making us more sensitive to certain triggers. And in a way that makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, Our brains are wired to learn from past experiences to protect us from future harm. But sometimes those protective mechanisms can backfire.
Absolutely. Those filters can be helpful, but they can also limit us, keeping us stuck in patterns that no longer serve us. That's why Dispenza stresses the importance of bringing those unconscious patterns into conscious awareness so we can choose to respond differently.
So it's not about erasing those past experiences. It's about recognizing their influence and choosing to rewrite the narrative to create a new blueprint that aligns with our goals and values.
It's about taking back the power to shape our perception and create a reality that reflects our highest potential.
And this all ties back to neuroplasticity, the idea that our brains are not fixed. They are constantly evolving based on our experiences, our thoughts, and the choices we make. So if we can rewire our brains to overcome negative patterns, what are some techniques Dispenza recommends to help us cultivate more positive ones?
One of the most powerful techniques he discusses is mental rehearsal, which we touched on earlier. He compares it to athletes training their minds and bodies for peak performance. And emphasizes the importance of focused attention and repetition.
So like an athlete visualizing a perfect shot or a musician mentally rehearsing a complex piece.
We can use mental rehearsal to create new neural pathways that support our desired outcomes.
Exactly. The key is to engage all of our senses in the visualization. to make it as real and vivid as possible.
Okay.
And to repeat the process, consistently strengthening those neural connections.
It reminds me of that famous quote, neurons that fire together wire together.
Exactly.
The more we activate those desired neural pathways, the stronger and more accessible they become.
And as those pathways become more ingrained, we start to see changes not just in our thoughts and feelings, but also in our behavior and ultimately in our reality.
This is all pretty mind-blowing stuff. I mean, the idea that we have the power to consciously shape our brains and create a reality that reflects our deepest desires is incredibly empowering.
Yeah.
But I imagine it takes a lot of effort and dedication to actually make those changes stick.
Dispenza acknowledges that it's not always easy.
Right.
It requires disciplined patience and a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones.
But he also emphasizes that the rewards are well worth the effort.
Because the alternative is to remain stuck in those old patterns, reacting automatically to the same triggers, and living a life that doesn't truly reflect who we want to be.
He encourages us to see ourselves as works in progress, constantly evolving and becoming more aligned with our highest potential.
And that potential unfolds as we begin to understand and utilize the incredible power of our minds. It's like we're all carrying around these amazing untapped resources within our own minds. And Dispenza's work provides a roadmap for how to access those resources and use them to create a more fulfilling life.
Right.
But I'm curious, what stood out to you as the most powerful or perhaps surprising takeaway from his book?
What struck me the most was Dispenza's assertion that we are not limited by our past experiences.
Okay.
We can literally rewire our brains to create new, healthier patterns of thought and behavior.
It's almost like we have the power to rewrite our own personal history, not by changing the events themselves, but by changing our relationship to them, how they affect us in the present moment.
Exactly. And he provides a framework for how to do that, emphasizing the importance of self-awareness, conscious choice, and repetition in rewiring our brains for greater well-being.
So it's not a passive process. It takes effort, it takes commitment, but it's within our grasp. We're not just victims of our circumstances or our genetics. We have agency. We have the power to shape our own minds and create a reality that aligns with our deepest desires.
And he encourages us to embrace the journey, acknowledging that it's not always easy, but emphasizing that the rewards are well worth the effort.
Because imagine a life where you're no longer controlled by those old limiting patterns, where you have the freedom to choose how you want to feel and respond to the world around you. That's a pretty compelling vision.
It is, and it's a vision that becomes more attainable as we begin to understand the incredible power of neuroplasticity.
So to bring it all back to the listener,
okay,
what would you say is the most essential piece of advice Dispenza offers for someone who's just starting to explore these ideas and wants to apply them to their own life?
I think it comes down to becoming aware of your thoughts and actions.
Okay.
Recognizing those automatic programs that are running in the background. And consciously choosing to do things differently.
So it's about hitting that pause button, becoming the observer of our own minds. And making deliberate choices that align with our desired outcomes.
Exactly. And to remember that it's an ongoing process. There will be setbacks. There will be times when we fall back into old patterns. But the key is to keep practicing, to keep reinforcing those new neural pathways, and to celebrate the progress we make along the way.
It's like we're all sculptors constantly shaping and reshaping our brains with every thought, every action, every choice we make. And Dispenza's work gives us the tools to become more conscious and intentional artists of our own minds.
And to remember that it's a lifelong practice. Our brains are constantly evolving, and so are we.
Well said. And on that note, I want to thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the fascinating world of neuroplasticity and the power of the mind.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And to our listener, we encourage you to delve deeper into Dispenza's work and to start experimenting with these concepts in your own life. Remember, you have the power to evolve your brain and create a reality that reflects your highest potential. Keep those neural pathways firing, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.